Okay, so we are going to do some Q&A. So if anybody does have questions, either I guess raise your hand or you can put your question in chat. And we'll do that in a couple of minutes. But Karen, I think you narrate a part of the story where Sebastian is trying to come to grips with this loss. This is now a few years, I think, into the kidnapping and no resolution. And he lands on a definition of something called ambiguous loss. And I was thinking, I think you point out, or the story points out, you know, how many thousands, tens of thousands of people in Iraq have had these kinds of losses. And I wondered, talk about that. What does that mean, ambiguous loss, and how does it affect people, you know, both individually, but also a country to have so many people in this kind of state of limbo?
I'll talk about it for a second and then I'll hand it to Sebastian because he lived this, but I watched him live it as a friend and as the person who was kind of co-reporting it with him. I mean, I think that the death of someone you love is always a difficult thing, but there's a difference between being able to have some kind of closure and having and not having that. I don't even know how better to say it, but I also watched Sebastian lose other people that he loved in his life, that he knew all the facts of their passing. And it just, even as an observer, it was just a very different experience. And I think even in this, may be a terrible analogy, but even in a pandemic where like there's just this extended forever and ever uncertainty, all of us are feeling the tiniest version of that, which is just like, I feel a lot of grief and loss, and I'm not exactly sure how to pin that down. But Sebastian, obviously you lived this and you'll, it's a hard thing to even explain, I think, even as someone who lived it, but yeah, Sebastian, if you have thoughts.
Sure, yeah, this was, I think, at one point gonna make it into the edit, but didn't, when I think Gregory asked me how to, because I found ambiguous loss, the term, and the Pauline Boss, who is the family therapist who coined the term. Gregory asked me, how did you find the term? And the reality is I literally, at a point of desperation, Googled what I was feeling. I couldn't remember exactly what the search terms were, but I literally just put into Google what I was feeling. And after a few clicks, it literally came back to me, oh, ambiguous loss. And it's a book and a concept by Pauline Boss. And succinctly, it's loss without closure. And it can be what I experienced in losing Kamaran, which is, someone's kidnapped and they don't come back. But it could be terminal illness where someone is dying, but they're almost dead, but they're not, and it continues for a very long time. It can be dementia, where somebody is physically present, but not mentally present. It can be adoption. It can be, and I think, I'm sure Pauline Boss is probably writing on how the pandemic is. Karen doesn't even need to tiptoe around it. I think the pandemic is 100%. We're all living some version of it. So yeah, that's how I came up with the term. What was the second part of the question? Oh, and unmute yourself.
Yeah. It was whether the country, how would a country?
Right. So yeah. So about how it affected the country. So just to give you the numbers, ICMP, which is the International Committee on Missing Persons, which was formed after the Balkan Wars, they estimate that since the 1980s, over 1 million Iraqis have gone missing and have not been found, which means that's 1 million families, 1 million friends, maybe more than 1 million friends, who don't know where their loved one has gone, and they think that in and of itself, just that having so many people missing loved ones is itself a blockage of forming civil society in Iraq today.
There's a really beautiful poem that almost made it into the story but didn't, that if you buy Sebastian's book, you can read. He did a beautiful photo book about this, and it's a really moving poem by a Kurdish poet who says, if you come to my country and you want to lay a wreath at the tomb of the unknown soldier, I'm sure I'm doing this injustice, but essentially, if you want to lay a wreath at the tomb of the unknown soldier, you could lay it at any rock, at any mosque, at any home, literally, and it says under any yard of sky, I think is what it says, that there's so much ambiguous loss in the country, and so much loss overall, that if you wanted to lay a wreath at the tomb of the unknown soldier in Kurdistan, you could lay it anywhere. And it's just a beautiful representation of this particular kind of heartbreak.
One of those many choices you have to make where you have something incredible and it doesn't quite make it in, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There was a lot of that.
Yeah. So
we interviewed, so I was just going to quickly just
Yeah.
mention, we interviewed a Kenyan academic for a piece that we did more recently about the emerging legacy of George Floyd. And she mentioned about sort of in a country where so many people, where police violence is so common, we need to learn to grieve for one person. And this balance, I think, between, we're going to focus on this one person, even though we understand that so many have died. It's just sort of an exercise, I think, in allowing us, or even Ahmed talks about sort of allowing himself to feel his grief, and something important to us.
right, right.